You find yourself in the low flat lands of Flanders in the early 12th century. The ground beneath your feet is damp most of the year. Canals cut the land into careful shapes, and the smell of wool grease and wet earth hangs in the air. This is not a dramatic place at first glance. It is a region built on trade, routine, and patience. Yet it is here that one of the most quietly determined revenge stories of medieval Europe begins. Flanders at this time is wealthy by medieval standards. Cloth production fills the towns of Bruges, Ghent, and Ypres. Sheep are counted carefully, ledgers are kept, tolls are collected at bridges and ports. Revenge in this world does not begin with swords drawn in torchlight. It begins with records, family names, remembered insults, and the slow accumulation of grievance. Count Charles of Flanders was born into this environment around the late 11th century. He was not born to rule Flanders directly. He was a younger son, and like many younger sons of noble families, his early life was shaped by uncertainty. He traveled, served, and waited. When power finally came to him, it came with expectations of order rather than glory. You should imagine Charles as a man more comfortable with routine than spectacle. Contemporary chroniclers describe him as pious and restrained. He attended mass regularly, he listened to petitions, he worried about grain prices and the welfare of peasants during harsh winters. This alone made him unusual among medieval rulers, but it also placed him directly in conflict with powerful families who had grown rich through exploitation. The greatest of these families were the Arambolds. They were not ancient nobility. Their rise came through administrative service. They controlled tolls, courts, and access to the count himself. Over decades, they turned these positions into hereditary power. They charged illegal fees. They seized land. They intimidated villagers who could not pay. To the people of Flanders, the Arambolds were not dramatic villains. They were worse. They were predictable. Every harvest brought the same extortions. Every legal dispute ended the same way. The system ground on, year after year, wearing people down. Charles noticed this pattern slowly. At first he tried reform. He ordered audits of tolls. He summoned local officials to explain discrepancies. These actions seemed boring, even harmless. But to the Arambolds, they were threats. Every question Charles asked was a reminder that power could be examined. You should understand how dangerous examination was in medieval politics. Power survived by being unquestioned. Written records were fragile. Oral memory mattered. If a ruler asked too many questions, he risked exposing not just corruption, but the fragile compromises that held society together. Charles persisted. He reduced grain hoarding during a famine. He forced the release of stored food. This made him popular with peasants and deeply unpopular with those who profited from scarcity. Revenge began to take shape here, not as a single act, but as mutual awareness. Charles knew he was making enemies. The Arambolds knew he would not stop. On the morning of his murder, Charles went to church as he always did. The setting was the Church of Saint Donation in Bruges. It was early, candles burned low. The smell of incense mixed with cold stone. Assassins approached him quietly. They struck him down during prayer. This was not a chaotic killing. It was deliberate and contained. The message was clear. Reform had limits. Even a count could be punished for crossing invisible lines. But revenge in this story does not belong to the dead man. It belongs to what followed. The people of Bruges reacted not with riot, but with memory. They remembered the audits. They remembered the grain. They remembered that Charles had listened. The city closed its gates. The killers were hunted not through passion but through process. Names were listed. Families were traced. Safe houses were identified. What followed was one of the most methodical retaliations of the medieval period. The Arambold family was accused not only of murder, but of serf origin, a devastating charge in a society obsessed with lineage. Records were searched. Witnesses were questioned. The trial unfolded slowly, publicly, and relentlessly. You can imagine the hours spent listening to testimony, the repetition of accusations, the long pauses as scribes copied statements. Revenge here was not a sword swing. It was the stripping away of legitimacy. Members of the Arambold family were executed. Their properties were confiscated. Their name became a warning. This was not done quickly. It took months. Each step reinforced the lesson that power could be undone by patience and collective will. What makes this revenge story remarkable is its tone. There was no single avenger, no dramatic duel. Instead, there was a community using procedure as a weapon. Justice became a form of revenge, and revenge became a form of social repair. As you rest with this story, consider how unusual it was for ordinary townspeople to shape the aftermath of a political murder. Consider how records, memory, and persistence replaced bloodshed as tools of reckoning. And consider whether this slow revenge truly ended corruption in Flanders, or merely taught it to hide more carefully. You remain in Flanders after the murder of Count Charles. But time now stretches out and slows. The immediate shock has passed. The body has been buried, candles have burned down to stubs. What replaces outrage is administration. This is where the revenge truly deepens, not through violence but through structure. The city of Bruges does not descend into chaos. Instead, its leaders act with an unusual discipline. Gates remain closed. Guards are posted not to attack, but to prevent escape. Messengers are sent to nearby towns and to the King of France. Every movement is deliberate. The city understands that if justice is rushed, it will fail. You should picture the council chambers of Bruges during these weeks. Wooden benches worn smooth by years of use. Scrolls laid out carefully. Men speaking in low voices, repeating facts again and again. They are not seeking drama. They are seeking certainty. The accusation against the Ehrenbold family grows beyond the murder itself. Their lineage becomes central. In medieval society, lineage is not just pride, it is legal foundation. Nobles are expected to rule. Serfs are expected to obey. The Ehrenbolds had risen from administrative service, but whispers had long suggested they were not truly freeborn. This accusation matters because it reframes the murder. If the Ehrenbolds were of servile origin, then their authority had always been false. Their judgments, tolls, and punishments would be illegitimate. The killing of Charles would not be an isolated crime, but the final act of a long fraud. Investigators begin asking questions that seem dull, but are deeply dangerous. Who was whose grandfather? Who had once paid labor dues? Who had been freed, and under what terms? Witnesses are summoned not to recount the murder, but to remember decades-old obligations. Memory in this period is fragile but powerful. Written records exist, but they are incomplete. Much rests on what people are willing to say publicly. The poor are cautious, the powerful are defensive. Yet Charles' reputation changes everything. People who might have stayed silent now speak. You hear the same phrases repeated in testimony. He collected more than was due. He threatened us with prison. He said the Count would never hear of it. These are not dramatic statements, but they accumulate weight. Each one adds pressure. The accused respond with confidence at first. They dress well, they arrive with supporters. They insist on their service to the county. But as days turn into weeks, their certainty erodes. Too many voices contradict them. Too many small details align. What is remarkable is the absence of haste. Executions do not come quickly. Confiscations are delayed. The process unfolds at a pace that feels almost sleepy. This slowness is intentional. It allows doubt to fade and acceptance to grow. You must understand how rare this is in medieval justice. Many trials end quickly. Confessions are forced. Punishments are public and brutal. Here the brutality is postponed. The real punishment is exposure. The King of France eventually confirms the verdicts. This external authority matters. It transforms local revenge into lawful judgment. The executions that follow are not spectacles of rage. They are framed as restoration of order. Members of the Ehrenbold family are executed in different ways depending on their perceived guilt. Some are hanged, some are mutilated. Their properties are seized and redistributed. Their name is spoken carefully, often followed by silence. But revenge does not end with death. It continues through policy. Offices once controlled by the family are reorganized. New officials are appointed under stricter oversight. Records are kept with greater care. The machinery of governance is adjusted. For ordinary people, these changes feel subtle. Tolls are slightly lower. Court hearings are marginally fairer. Grain prices stabilize more quickly during shortages. These are small things, but they accumulate into trust. You should also notice what does not change. Power remains concentrated. Peasants are still bound to land. Justice still favors the educated and connected. The revenge of Charles does not create equality. It creates limits. This distinction matters. Medieval revenge often aims not to destroy systems, but to correct excess. The goal is balance, not transformation. Charles becomes a symbol of this restrained ideal. Over time, stories about him grow simpler. He is remembered as the good count. Details fade. Complexity disappears. This simplification is itself a kind of revenge against those who killed him. They are remembered as villains. He is remembered as order. Yet, beneath this memory lies discomfort. The Erenbolds did not act alone. They thrived because many benefited from their rule. Many looked away. Many accepted unfairness as normal. The trial punishes a family, but it does not fully confront collective complicity. As you drift with this thought, consider how revenge can satisfy without fully resolving injustice. Consider how procedure can calm anger without erasing its causes. And consider whether the careful destruction of one powerful family truly honored Charles' ideals, or merely preserved a system he hoped to improve. You return to Flanders, after the trials and executions have ended. Time has passed quietly. The city gates are open again. Trade has resumed. Barges move slowly along canals, carrying wool, grain and wine. At first glance, it seems as though the county has absorbed the shock and continued on its familiar path. This sense of normality is deceptive. Something subtle but lasting has changed. The absence of the Erenbold family leaves gaps that are not immediately visible. Their former houses stand occupied by new officials. Their lands are worked by the same peasants under new supervision. The routines of daily life continue, but the memory of what happened lingers beneath them. You should imagine how people speak of these events in the years that follow, not with excitement, but with care. Parents mention the story to their children while discussing tolls or courts. Merchants refer to it when negotiating contracts. Clergy recall it in sermons about authority and humility. The story becomes instructional rather than emotional. Count Charles himself begins to transform in memory. During his life, he was cautious, methodical, and often quiet. After his death, he becomes an example. Chroniclers emphasize his fairness, his concern for the poor, and his willingness to challenge corruption. His mistakes and hesitations are gradually smoothed away. This process is not unique to Charles. Medieval memory often reshapes figures into symbols that serve social needs. In this case, Charles becomes a reminder that authority has responsibilities. He is remembered less for his policies, and more for the response his death provoked. What matters most is not that he was murdered, but that his murder failed to restore the old order. Those who plotted against him likely expected fear to settle over Flanders. They assumed people would retreat into silence. Instead, the opposite occurred. The mechanisms of power were exposed, examined, and reassembled. You should consider how unusual this outcome was. In many parts of medieval Europe, assassinations reinforced tyranny. Here it weakened it, if only slightly. The revenge was not explosive, but corrective. The legal precedents established during the trials endure. The idea that lineage can be questioned, that office holders can be investigated, and that collective action can succeed enters the political imagination of the region. These ideas do not create democracy, but they introduce caution into governance. Officials who follow become more attentive to appearances. Records are kept more carefully. Decisions are justified more often. These changes are incremental and easily overlooked, but they matter. They shape how power is exercised. For ordinary people, the impact is uneven. Some benefit from fairer tolls and courts. Others see little change. Yet even those who do not benefit directly gain something intangible. They gain the knowledge that injustice can be challenged, even if only rarely. Revenge in this story does not restore Charles to life. It does not erase suffering. It does not dismantle inequality. What it does is establish a boundary. It shows that exploitation has limits, and that those limits can be enforced through patience rather than chaos. As you rest with this conclusion, think about how this form of revenge contrasts with the dramatic tales often told about medieval violence. Here, the most powerful force is endurance. The most effective weapon is memory. The most lasting victory is restraint. The story of Count Charles of Flanders reminds you that history is often shaped not by sudden upheavals, but by slow responses to wrongdoing. It suggests that justice, even when delayed and imperfect, can alter the course of events in ways that quiet heroics never could. In the long view of history, this revenge did not burn brightly, but it burned steadily, and in doing so, it left an imprint on how authority, responsibility, and consequence were understood in medieval Europe. An imprint that still echoes whenever power is questioned, not with anger, but with persistence. You now move forward in time only slightly, and across the Channel, arriving in the English city of Winchester in the early 13th century. Winchester is no longer the capital it once was, but it remains heavy with administration. Royal records are kept here. Courts sit here. Courts copy charters in careful hands. It is a city shaped not by sudden drama, but by paperwork, routine, and precedent. This is where the story of a widow begins, not with her name recorded clearly, but with her status. In medieval England, widowhood is both a vulnerability and a legal condition. A widow may hold property, but only under strict rules. She may speak in court, but only in certain contexts. She is visible to the law, but rarely protected by it. You should imagine her as an ordinary woman by medieval standards. She is not noble. She is not destitute. Her husband was a tradesman, perhaps a leather worker or a minor merchant. He owned a house, a small plot of land, and some tools. When he died, these things did not simply pass to her. They became subjects of scrutiny. Under English common law, a widow is entitled to her dower, usually 1/3 of her husband's estate. This sounds generous, but in practice it is fragile. It depends on documentation, witnesses, and male cooperation. Without these, a widow can be left waiting indefinitely. In Winchester, waiting is what defines her days. She petitions local officials for recognition of her dower. She brings neighbors to testify. She pays small fees to clerks who promise to move her case forward. Each step feels procedural and slow. You should pay attention to the texture of this process. The walking across town, the standing in corridors, the repetition of the same request in slightly different words. This is not dramatic suffering. It is administrative exhaustion. Meanwhile, her husband's relatives contest her claim. They argue that the property should revert to the family line. They delay hearings. They exploit technicalities. They are not villains in a theatrical sense. They are simply skilled in navigating the system. The law, as written, supports the widow. The law, as practiced, does not hurry. Cases can drag on for years. During this time, the widow must live. She rents part of her house. She sells some tools. Each compromise weakens her position further. This is where resentment begins to grow. Not as anger, but as clarity. She realizes that the law rewards endurance, not justice. Those who can wait longest, win. Those who need resolution, lose. You should understand how radical this realization is. Medieval society teaches acceptance. Suffering is framed as spiritual trial. Authority is divinely ordered. To recognize structural failure is to step quietly outside these beliefs. The widow does not rebel openly. She continues to appear compliant, but she begins to learn. She listens carefully in court. She notes which clerks are efficient and which are not. She observes how language shapes outcomes. Over time, her case becomes known among officials as troublesome, not because she is disruptive, but because she does not disappear. She returns again and again. She corrects errors in records. She brings new witnesses when old ones die or move away. Years pass. Her situation does not dramatically improve, but it stabilizes. This stability allows her to think beyond survival. She begins to understand the system as something that can be used, not merely endured. What follows is not immediate revenge, but preparation. She starts advising other widows informally. She helps them draft petitions. She explains which officials to approach. This knowledge sharing is quiet and unofficial, but it spreads. The law begins to strain under this pressure. Clerks notice patterns. Judges hear similar arguments repeated. Delays become visible. The system is not designed to handle collective persistence from those it expects to exhaust. You should notice how revenge is taking shape here. It is not aimed at an individual. It is aimed at a process. The widow is not seeking punishment. She is seeking exposure. As this section draws to a close, consider how many lives were shaped by similar failures of medieval law. Consider how patience can become resistance. And consider whether a system built on delay can survive when those subject to it learn to wait just as long. You remain in Winchester, but the years continue to pass quietly. Seasons change with little ceremony. Winters are damp and grey. Summers bring the smell of river water and livestock. Through all of this, the widow continues to move through the same streets, entering the same buildings, speaking to the same offices that once seemed distant and immovable. What changes now is not the law itself, but her relationship to it. At first, her persistence is tolerated. Clerks sigh when they see her approach. Judges recognize her face but rarely her name. She is categorized, not as a threat, but as an inconvenience. Medieval bureaucracy is well practiced at absorbing inconvenience. But persistence has a cumulative effect. Her petitions are consistent. Her language becomes precise. She begins to quote previous rulings, not accurately in every detail, but confidently enough to slow proceedings. Confidence alone carries weight in a courtroom where many petitioners speak hesitantly. You should imagine her standing before a bench of men who expect uncertainty from someone in her position. Instead, she speaks calmly. She waits for interruptions to end. She repeats herself without apology. This demeanor unsettles expectations. Her case still does not move quickly, but it no longer drifts backward. Delays that once reset the process now merely extend it. This alone is a small victory. At the same time, her informal network grows. Other widows begin seeking her out. Some come with questions. Others come simply to listen. They gather in kitchens, in churchyards, near market stalls. Information spreads slowly but steadily. You should understand how unusual this is. Medieval legal knowledge is meant to remain centralized. It belongs to clerks, lawyers, and judges. When ordinary people begin sharing procedural understanding, the system feels strain. The widows learn how to phrase complaints. They learn which courts to avoid and which to insist upon. They learn that silence often benefits the opposing party more than speech. None of this is revolutionary on its own, but together it forms a pattern. Officials begin to notice that similar petitions are appearing more frequently. They are not identical, but they follow familiar structures. This repetition exposes the delays that once appeared isolated. Patterns become visible. The widow herself becomes something of an informal authority. This does not grant her protection. In fact, it increases scrutiny. Clerks begin recording her appearances more carefully. Mistakes are corrected quickly, sometimes pointedly. There is tension here, but still no open conflict. Medieval systems resist confrontation. They prefer fatigue. The hope is that she and those she advises will eventually stop. But the widow does not stop. Her own case reaches a critical point when a judge, newly appointed and less embedded in local habits, reviews the file. He sees the length of the delay. He notes the repeated confirmations of her claim. He recognizes that resolution has been postponed beyond reason. The ruling, when it comes, is narrow. She is granted her dower, but without compensation for lost years. The judgment is framed as routine. No fault is assigned. No apology is offered. You might expect satisfaction here, but what the widow feels is something more complicated. Relief, yes, but also clarity. The law did not correct itself willingly. It had to be pressed, slowly and repeatedly, into movement. Her revenge, if it can be called that, does not end with her personal success. She continues advising others. She accompanies them to court when possible. Her presence alone alters proceedings. Officials speak more carefully. Delays are justified more explicitly. This is not altruism alone. It is memory at work. Each time she stands beside another petitioner, she reenacts her own struggle. The system is forced to confront its habits again and again. Over time, small adjustments occur. Some courts begin prioritizing long-delayed cases. Clerks are instructed to track widow petitions more clearly. These changes are not recorded as reforms. They appear as practical responses to inconvenience. You should note how revenge operates here. It is not punitive. No one is publicly disgraced. Instead, inefficiency is made visible. Delay is turned into embarrassment. The system is compelled to function closer to its stated ideals. Yet, limits remain. Many widows still fail. Many never gain access to this informal knowledge. The law improves unevenly. It remains biased, hierarchical, and slow. Now, consider whether the widow changed the law, or merely learned how to survive within it. Consider how quiet persistence can expose injustice without ever naming it. And consider what happens when systems built on delay encounter people who refuse to disappear. You encounter the widow again much later, when she is no longer struggling simply to be heard. Age has changed her pace, but not her presence. She moves more slowly through Winchester now, but she is recognized, not officially, and not with ceremony, but with familiarity. Clerks nod. Petitioners step aside. Her name may still be uncertain in the records, but her role is not. Her own legal battle has long since ended. She lives modestly on what remains of her dower. The house is smaller than it once was. Some rooms are rented. Daily life is shaped by routine rather than urgency. Yet her connection to the courts continues. You should imagine her sitting quietly during hearings, listening more than speaking. She notices shifts in language. She hears when a clerk explains a delay instead of ignoring it. She observes when a judge asks for clarification rather than dismissal. These moments are small, but they signal change. The system has not transformed, but it has adapted. Widow petitions are now treated as a known category, rather than an irritation. Some officials even anticipate them, preparing documents in advance. This preparedness is not recorded as reform, but it alters outcomes. What matters most is not how many cases succeed, but how many are acknowledged. Recognition itself becomes a form of justice. The widow understands this deeply. Her revenge, if it can be named that, lies in forcing acknowledgement where none was intended. Over time, stories circulate. Not formal chronicles, but shared memory. A woman in Winchester who knew the law, a widow who never left. These stories are simplified, as all memories are. Details fade, intentions are reshaped. You should notice how different this revenge is from violence. No blood is shed, no names are erased. Yet the impact endures longer than many battles. Procedures change quietly. Expectations shift. When the widow eventually disappears from the courts, there is no announcement. Her absence is noticed only gradually. Someone asks where she has gone. Another replies that she no longer comes. The system continues without her, but not unchanged. The knowledge she shared remains. Women speak more confidently. Petitions are better structured. Clerks expect persistence. Delay is still present, but it is less absolute. This story does not end with triumph. Many injustices remain. The law still favors property, lineage, and male authority. But within these limits, something has been adjusted. The widow did not overturn the system. She bent it, slightly, through endurance. As you reflect on this story, consider how revenge can take the form of correction rather than punishment. Consider how quiet insistence can reshape institutions over time. And consider how many similar figures have been forgotten, their names lost, but their influence preserved in small procedural changes that continue to affect lives long after they are gone. In the long view of history, the widow of Winchester reminds you that not all revenge seeks destruction. Some revenge seeks recognition, some seeks memory, and some, achieved without spectacle or force, becomes part of the very structure that once denied justice, shaping it from within for generations to come. You now travel east into the rolling countryside of Burgundy, where vineyards stretch across low hills and stone abbeys sit quietly at the edges of villages. It is the late 11th century, a time when monastic life is expanding rapidly across Europe. Monasteries are not only spiritual centers, they are landlords, employers, and record keepers. Their power is quiet, persistent, and deeply embedded in daily life. The abbey at the center of this story is not famous. It does not house a great relic or attract royal patronage. It exists to farm land, copy texts, and pray at fixed hours. Its buildings are practical, its walls are thick, its routines are unchanging. You should imagine the soundscape of this place. Bells mark the hours. Sandals scrape stone floors. Voices chant psalms in measured tones. Life here is defined by repetition. Change is slow and often unwelcome. The monk whose story you follow entered this abbey as a young man. His name is recorded only once in surviving documents, and even that record is uncertain. Like many monks, he was not escaping the world so much as exchanging one form of obligation for another. His family had offered him to the monastery, likely to secure spiritual favor or reduce the burden of inheritance. Monastic life demands obedience. A monk owns nothing. He speaks when permitted. His days are divided between prayer, labor, and study. This structure is meant to suppress ego. In practice, it often sharpens awareness of injustice. You should understand that monasteries are hierarchical communities. Abbots wield immense authority. Senior monks control work assignments and discipline. Favor and disfavor shape daily comfort. Silence magnifies resentment. For years the monk lives quietly. He works in the fields, then later in the scriptorium. He copies texts carefully, learning patience through repetition. His handwriting improves. His understanding of Latin deepens. He becomes useful. Usefulness, however, invites exploitation. The abbot begins assigning him more labor. His tasks multiply. Others are spared. No explanation is given. Complaints are discouraged. This imbalance might seem minor, but in a world where every hour is accounted for, it matters deeply. Fatigue accumulates. Resentment grows not through sudden insult, but through routine unfairness. The monk initially seeks resolution through obedience. He prays for humility. He accepts correction. This response is expected and praised, but over time he notices patterns. Punishments fall unevenly. Labor is distributed according to favor rather than rule. You should consider how awareness develops in such an environment. With no private space, no external distractions, the mind turns inward, memory sharpens, details are remembered. The turning point comes not through violence, but through documentation. While copying a charter, the monk notices discrepancies. Land grants recorded differently in different texts. Obligations shifted quietly over time. The abbey has absorbed more land than its charters justify. This discovery is not dramatic. It unfolds slowly, page by page, comparison by comparison. The monk realizes that authority here rests not only on spiritual legitimacy, but on control of records. Revenge does not form immediately. At first, there is confusion, doubt. He assumes he has misunderstood, but the pattern persists. The abbey has expanded its holdings through quiet alteration of documents. You should understand the implications. If exposed, this could damage the abbey's reputation. Patronage could be questioned. The abbeyate could be removed. The monk says nothing. Silence is his strength. He continues copying. He memorizes details. He notes dates, phrasing, seals. His patience deepens. At the same time, his treatment worsens. The abbot senses resistance, perhaps unconsciously. The monk is assigned harder labor. He is corrected publicly. His obedience is questioned. This pressure does not break him. It focuses him. Revenge begins to take shape, not as anger, but as intention. As you rest at the end of this section, consider how power in medieval institutions depended on trust and record-keeping. Consider how those closest to the system often see its flaws most clearly, and consider whether a monk bound by vows of obedience could ever challenge authority without breaking those vows. You remain within the abbey walls, where seasons pass almost unnoticed. Vines are pruned, harvests are recorded, psalms are sung at the same hours, day after day. From the outside, nothing changes. Inside, however, attention sharpens. The monk continues his work in the scriptorium. He copies slowly, deliberately, as he always has. What changes is how he reads. Every charter, every donation record, every confirmation from a local lord is examined in relation to others. He begins to understand not only what is written, but why it is written that way. You should imagine the physical act of copying, the preparation of parchment, the careful mixing of ink, the measured strokes of the quill. These actions require calm and patience. They also allow time for thought. Revenge here grows in the margins of routine. He notices how certain phrases appear only in later copies. Clauses that favor the abbey appear gradually, almost imperceptibly. The changes are subtle enough to escape casual notice, but consistent enough to matter. The monk does not confront the abbot. Confrontation would be useless and dangerous. Instead, he continues to observe. He learns which documents are consulted most often. He learns which are rarely checked. He learns how authority relies on repetition, rather than verification. You should understand that medieval legal culture depends heavily on precedent and memory. If a document has been accepted for long enough, it becomes true in practice. Challenging it requires not only evidence, but credibility. The monk begins to prepare quietly. He makes copies for himself, committing them to memory, rather than hiding physical duplicates. He notes exact wording. He memorizes seals and witnesses. This knowledge is portable. It cannot be confiscated. Meanwhile, tensions within the abbey increase. Peasants on abbey lands complain about rising obligations. Nearby lords question boundaries. These disputes are handled administratively, but unease grows. The monk is occasionally summoned to assist in these matters. His skill with texts makes him useful. He listens carefully. He hears how abbey representatives defend their claims. He recognizes where the arguments are weakest. You should notice how revenge is still delayed. Years pass. Opportunities do not come quickly. The monk waits. Eventually, an external visitation is announced. A bishop plans to inspect the abbey. Such visitations are routine, but they are moments of vulnerability. Records are reviewed, complaints are heard. The abbot prepares carefully. Documents are organized. Selected monks are coached on what to say. Silence is emphasized. The monk is not selected to speak. This exclusion is meant to marginalize him. Instead, it grants him freedom. He observes without pressure. During the visitation, he notices inconsistencies. A charter is read aloud that he knows differs from earlier versions. The bishop asks a question. The abbot answers confidently, but incorrectly. This moment is brief and easily overlooked. The monk does nothing. Yet something shifts. He realizes that authority depends on uninterrupted performance. A single pause can matter. After the visitation, tensions increase. The abbot becomes more severe, discipline tightens. The monk is assigned harsher labor. You should consider how power reacts when it senses exposure. Control increases. Flexibility disappears. The monk continues to endure. His revenge is now clearly formed, but still restrained. He is waiting for a moment when intervention will appear not rebellious but corrective. That moment begins to approach when a neighboring lord files a formal complaint about abbey land claims. This dispute escalates beyond local mediation. It draws attention from higher authorities. The monk understands the stakes. If the dispute reaches a royal court or papal authority, records will be scrutinized closely. Expertise will be required. As this section ends, consider how patience can transform vulnerability into leverage. Consider how knowledge, when withheld, becomes power. And consider whether exposing truth within a corrupt system constitutes revenge, justice, or something in between. You remain in Burgundy, but now the rhythm of monastic life is disrupted. The dispute over land has grown beyond the abbey walls. Messengers arrive. Letters are sealed and unsealed. The quiet authority the abbey once enjoyed is replaced by careful defensiveness. The complaint filed by the neighboring lord is precise. Boundaries are described in detail. Old witnesses are named. Copies of earlier charters are requested. This level of scrutiny is uncomfortable for an institution accustomed to unquestioned legitimacy. The abbot responds by gathering documents. He relies on the versions long accepted as authoritative. These documents are not false in an obvious way. They are simply altered enough to benefit the abbey. Their credibility depends on familiarity rather than truth. The monk is summoned at last, not as an accuser, but as a scribe. His task is to assist in organizing records for presentation. This is the moment he has anticipated for years. You should imagine the tension of this task. Every movement is observed. Every word is weighed. He must act within his vows. He must not lie. He must not disobey directly. His revenge unfolds through precision. When asked to prepare a document, he selects the earliest verified version. When discrepancies arise, he notes them neutrally. He does not accuse, he compares. This approach is devastating precisely because it is restrained. The differences are clear. Witness lists do not match. Clauses appear suddenly in later copies. The pattern becomes undeniable. External authorities notice. Questions are asked. The abbot attempts to explain, but explanations multiply rather than resolve. You should understand how damaging this is in medieval legal culture. Authority depends on continuity. When continuity breaks, legitimacy collapses. The monk never raises his voice. He never challenges the abbot directly. He simply performs his duty thoroughly. The ruling, when it comes, is careful. The abbey loses certain land claims. It is ordered to restore obligations to earlier terms. The abbot is censured but not removed. The institution survives, but diminished. The monk's life changes subtly. His labor assignments become more balanced. His treatment improves. He is not praised, but he is respected. His revenge does not destroy the abbey. It corrects it. The power that once operated through quiet manipulation is forced into transparency. As you reflect on this story, consider how revenge can exist without punishment. Consider how truth, presented patiently, can dismantle abuse more effectively than confrontation, and consider how obedience, when paired with attention, can become a form of resistance. The monk remains unnamed in most records. His actions are absorbed into institutional memory rather than celebrated. Yet the abbey functions differently because of him. In the long arc of history, this story reminds you that some of the most enduring acts of revenge are indistinguishable from reform. They do not announce themselves. They leave no monument. They simply change how power is exercised, quietly and permanently. You now move south into northern Italy, where hills rise more sharply, and stone fortresses watch over narrow roads. This is Tuscany, in the late 11th century, a landscape shaped by vineyards, monasteries, and constant negotiation between secular and religious power. Authority here is fragmented, loyalty is conditional, memory is long. This is the world of Matilda of Tuscany, one of the most powerful women of medieval Europe. Though power is not the word her contemporaries would have used, they would have spoken instead of duty, inheritance, and obligation. Revenge in her life does not come as an outburst. It unfolds across decades. You should imagine Matilda not as a romantic figure, but as an administrator. Her lands stretch across a wide territory, Castles must be maintained. Roads must be secured. Vassals must be managed. Letters must be answered. Every decision is slow, deliberate, and documented. Matilda inherits her position through a complicated lineage. Her father dies when she is young. Her mother governs as regent. From early on, Matilda learns that authority is fragile. It must be reinforced constantly, not through spectacle, but through consistency. Her enemies are not bandits or invaders. They are rival nobles, ambitious bishops, and imperial representatives. Each one challenges her authority not openly, but through legal argument, broken promises, and delayed obligations. You should pay attention to how conflict works here. Armies exist, but war is expensive and unpredictable. Far more common are disputes over rights. Who owes service? Who controls a monastery? Who has the right to appoint clergy? Matilda becomes deeply involved in the struggle between the Holy Roman Emperor and the papacy, known later as the investiture controversy. This conflict is not dramatic on a daily basis. It consists of letters, councils, excommunications, and negotiations that stretch on for years. At the center of this conflict is betrayal. Nobles who swear loyalty to Matilda later support the emperor. Bishops she protects turn against her when political winds shift. Each betrayal is recorded. Each is remembered. You should understand how personal this becomes. In a society where oaths define relationships, betrayal is not abstract. It is intimate. It undermines trust not just politically, but morally. Matilda does not respond immediately. She does not punish every defection. She absorbs losses. She waits. This waiting is not passive. It is observant. She continues to support the papacy. She provides shelter to popes in exile. She hosts councils. She finances defenses. These actions strain her resources, but they also clarify loyalties. Over time, a pattern emerges. Those who betray her tend to do so repeatedly. Those who remain loyal do so consistently. Matilda begins to distinguish between temporary weakness and fundamental unreliability. Revenge begins here, not as anger, but as categorization. She remembers who broke faith, and under what circumstances. She notes who returned, and who did not. You should imagine her issuing charters with careful wording. Grants that once seemed generous become conditional. Castles are entrusted temporarily rather than permanently. Responsibilities are divided to prevent consolidation. Her enemies often mistake this restraint for indecision. They push further. They seize land. They challenge authority in court. Matilda responds with documentation. She produces records. She appeals to higher authority. She allows disputes to escalate until they expose the opportunism behind them. This is slow justice. It frustrates those who expect swift retaliation. It requires endurance and resources. It also requires confidence that time will reveal truth. The cost is personal. Matilda marries and is widowed. She marries again under political pressure. Her personal happiness is limited. Her life is consumed by management. You should consider how exhausting this must be. Every decision carries consequence. Every delay invites challenge, yet she persists. As this section draws to a close, consider how revenge can be postponed without being abandoned. Consider how memory can become a ledger of trust and betrayal, and consider whether patience, when practiced over a lifetime, can become a more powerful form of justice than any single act of punishment. You remain in Tuscany, moving through the intricate web of castles, towns, and monasteries that Matilda governs. Time in this period stretches differently than it does for you now. Years pass almost unnoticed in their breadth, yet every season brings small shifts in loyalty and influence. Matilda's revenge, or perhaps her justice, continues to unfold slowly, like the gradual settling of sediment in a river. Her rivals are persistent. Local counts challenge her rights to fortresses. Bishops claim exemptions from her authority. Imperial envoys arrive, testing her responses. These confrontations are rarely violent. Instead, they appear in court documents, letters, and demands for service. Each is a ripple that threatens to undermine decades of careful administration. You should imagine Matilda poring over letters by candlelight. She reads Latin meticulously, compares charters, notes discrepancies, and considers precedents. Each observation is catalogued in her memory or written in marginalia. Her awareness of betrayal is methodical, not emotional. One particularly frustrating opponent is Count Werner, a noble whose lands border hers and whose loyalties shift unpredictably. He pledges support, then withdraws. He sues her in local courts over land boundaries, loses, and returns with renewed claims. Each action is recorded and remembered. Each delay tests her patience. Matilda responds not with immediate retaliation but with strategic restraint. She adjusts her grants and charters so that future claims can be invalidated without confrontation. She reinforces her loyal vassals, ensuring that even when disputes arise, she retains practical authority. In essence, she turns each act of betrayal into data for future decisions. You should consider how revolutionary this is. Revenge is often imagined as dramatic retaliation, but here it is cumulative. The memory of betrayal becomes an instrument of governance. Knowledge is weaponized, not force. Over time, Matilda's network expands. Monks, clerks, and local officials quietly become her allies. They recognize her attention to detail and her patience. Those who attempt deceit find themselves slowly boxed in by documentation and precedent. What initially seemed like minor advantages, scribal notes, dates, witnesses, become decisive tools of influence. Her patience pays off during the height of the investiture controversy. Popes, exiled or threatened by imperial forces, rely on Matilda's protection and resources. She provides shelter and ensures safe passage. The political capital she accumulates allows her to negotiate with rivals more effectively. Those who once sought to undermine her now face the prospect of collective opposition rooted in memory, loyalty, and careful preparation. At the same time, Matilda's approach imposes subtle forms of punishment. She delays confirmations, restricts privileges, and revises obligations in ways that appear procedural rather than vindictive. Her enemies are never publicly shamed, but they are impeded systematically. Their failures are exposed quietly, their influence eroded over time. You should notice the psychological effect of this approach. Rivals come to anticipate scrutiny, and the very act of attempting deception becomes riskier. The monk, clerk, or vassal knows that Matilda records every misstep. This omnipresence of observation is itself a form of slow revenge, delivered not in a single moment, but over years. Her personal sacrifices are considerable. Matilda remains largely unmarried or widowed, dedicating her life to administration and the defense of papal interests. Emotional satisfaction is rare. Triumphs are often procedural, yet this restraint amplifies the effectiveness of her long-term strategies. By now, Matilda's enemies have learned that direct confrontation yields little. They grow wary of legal maneuvers, recognizing that she is prepared to endure, to document, and to respond with patience. Even minor disputes become dangerous because they are recorded and remembered. Her revenge has become structural. It is embedded in the very mechanisms of governance. As this section draws to a close, consider the nature of power measured over decades. Consider how revenge can manifest as sustained observation rather than sudden action. And consider whether enduring patience, meticulous record-keeping, and strategic delay can constitute a form of justice more formidable than any immediate retaliation. You now follow Matilda toward the later years of her life, when decades of careful observation and methodical planning begin to bear their full effect. The landscape of northern Italy remains rugged and politically fragmented, yet her influence is unmistakable. What once required constant defense now commands respect, even from former adversaries. Matilda's slow justice culminates not in dramatic battles, but in the resolution of disputes that had festered for years. Rival nobles, long accustomed to testing her authority, find that their claims are repeatedly invalidated through careful record-keeping and precedent. The mechanisms she has quietly reinforced, scribes trained in precise documentation, loyal vassals positioned strategically, and meticulous preservation of charters, now operate as instruments of institutional memory. Betrayal is no longer easily hidden, and the weight of past actions guides current outcomes. You should imagine her sitting in one of her Tuscan fortresses, surrounded by parchment and ink, reviewing the same documents she has studied for decades. Each corrected misstatement, each verified charter, each cross-checked date is a small victory. There is no spectacle, no public display. The abbeys, towns, and castles under her control recognize her authority through the unassailable clarity of evidence rather than force. Her slow vengeance extends beyond rivals to institutions as well. Bishops who had previously opposed her find that their influence is checked by procedural rigor. The papacy, which she has supported so consistently, gains confidence in her reliability, and Matilda becomes a linchpin in the ongoing struggle between secular and religious power. Those who once considered exploiting her now navigate carefully, constrained by the structures she has shaped over decades. You should notice how her form of revenge is inseparable from governance. Every act of correction, every procedural insistence, every deliberate delay, every recorded observation is simultaneously justice and administration. The line between personal vengeance and the maintenance of order blurs, making her influence enduring rather than ephemeral. Matilda's legacy is also psychological. Nobles, clerics, and administrators internalize the lesson that deception and opportunism carry long-term consequences. Her patient, relentless approach fosters caution, not only in those directly involved, but in observers who recognize her methods as replicable. In this sense, revenge has become a form of deterrence that operates quietly across generations. Her personal life remains austere. Marriages, which could have provided conventional power or alliances, are brief or strategically neutralized. Her devotion to duty eclipses individual desire, and yet, in that discipline lies the enduring power of her approach, the knowledge that justice can be exercised not in moments of passion, but across the span of a lifetime. As you reflect on this story, consider how revenge need not be immediate or violent. Consider how memory records and the deliberate application of authority can deliver outcomes as effective, and sometimes more lasting than any battle or public spectacle. Matilda of Tuscany demonstrates that patience, intelligence, and procedural mastery can shape history quietly, methodically, and irrevocably. In the long arc of medieval Europe, her slow justice altered the balance of power in a region rife with ambition, betrayal, and shifting alliances. Her revenge was not a blaze but a steady light, illuminating the consequences of betrayal and the enduring value of meticulous, patient authority. Even centuries later, the lessons of her measured response to treachery echo in the annals of law, governance, and the subtle exercise of power. You now journey to the northern plains of England, in the late 12th century, where small towns cluster around winding rivers and fields stretch flat as far as the eye can see. These towns are quiet, dusty, and ordered by the rhythms of daily life, the rising of the sun, the tolling of church bells, the market days where grain, ale, and cloth are exchanged. Yet beneath this apparent calm lies a network of obligations and authority, of which most townspeople are painfully aware but rarely question. This is the world of Thomas, the baker's son. His family is ordinary. His father rises before dawn to knead dough, stoke the ovens, and deliver bread across the town. His mother tends small plots of vegetables and helps with deliveries. Thomas learns early that survival depends on hard work, patience, and the careful observation of rules. Every coin counts. Every debt matters. Mistakes are punished not dramatically but practically through hunger, loss of tools, or confiscation. The story begins with a document. A tax register, thin and precise, listing the obligations of every household in the town. It is not a grand artifact, but a small, powerful instrument of control. The local bailiff uses it to assess levies and collect dues. Families fear it. Its authority is quiet but absolute. One misstep can result in the seizure of property or imprisonment. Thomas notices the register on a spring morning, when he delivers bread to the town hall. The clerk is absent, the bailiff distracted. As he glances at the pages, he realizes a troubling pattern. The wealthier townspeople are underassessed, while the poorer households, like his own, are overtaxed. The entries are not accidental, they are deliberate, reflecting favoritism and corruption. This realization is not dramatic, but it carries weight. It shifts Thomas from passive observer to cautious thinker. He begins to notice subtle abuses elsewhere, fines imposed without explanation, records altered after the fact, and receipts misfiled. To his father and neighbors, these injustices are routine, accepted quietly as part of life. To Thomas, they are grievances that demand acknowledgement, if not immediate action. You should imagine the texture of this recognition. Small details, a line crossed out, a number slightly inflated, a note in the margin, begin to feel like evidence. His mind tracks these irregularities with the precision he has learned from baking, where measurement and timing dictate the success of every loaf. Every act of oversight or negligence becomes a potential point of leverage, a way to contest authority without open confrontation. The turning point comes during a particularly harsh winter, when taxes are due while grain supplies are low. Families are already struggling to feed themselves. The town bailiff, rigid in his calculations, insists on full payment. Thomas's own family cannot comply. His father worries that the debt will force them to surrender their small home or bakery tools. One evening, after a long day of deliveries and tending to ovens, Thomas makes a choice. He sneaks into the town hall under cover of darkness. The registers lie on the clerk's desk, vulnerable. With careful hands, he pours oil on the pages and sets them alight. The The flames consume not only the records of overtaxation, but also the corrupted accounting that favored the wealthy. The fire is swift, contained within the small office, yet it destroys years of bureaucratic control. This act is neither impulsive nor heroic in the dramatic sense. It is measured, deliberate, and carries risk. If caught, Thomas faces imprisonment, or worse. But he is fueled not by fury alone, but by a precise understanding of injustice and a determination to restore balance, however briefly, to his community. The aftermath is immediate but confusing. Without the registers, the town's tax collection grinds to a halt. Officials scramble, clerks search for copies, and families whisper about the fire. Some suspect accident, others perhaps see a deliberate hand. Thomas retreats into the rhythm of ordinary life, continuing his deliveries, watching carefully how authority responds. What is remarkable here is the subtlety of revenge. It is not a battle, it is not public humiliation, it is a disruption of the mechanisms of control, executed with precision, patience, and knowledge of the system's vulnerabilities. It is an act of quiet recalibration, a reminder that even ordinary individuals can influence structures much larger than themselves. As this section ends, consider the fragile authority of bureaucracies in medieval towns, the extraordinary power of small documents, and the ways that knowledge, patience, and careful observation can become instruments of revenge. And consider whether Thomas's act, though illegal, served justice more effectively than force ever could. You remain in the northern plains of England, now moving through the days and weeks following the fire at the town hall. The winter has receded, leaving fields damp and grey, and life returns to the familiar rhythms of work, bread, and market trade. Yet beneath the surface, tension lingers. The destruction of the tax registers has unsettled not only the town officials, but also the social order that depended on their quiet authority. The bailiff, whose office has been disrupted, begins a methodical response. He summons clerks, searches for backup records, and interviews townspeople. No one knows exactly who started the fire. Suspicion spreads, but without proof, no one can be punished. The fire has created ambiguity, a small but significant advantage for those previously oppressed. Thomas observes all of this from the margins, careful not to draw attention. He continues his deliveries, noting every meeting, every whispered conversation, every tense glance between officials. Patience is essential. Open action now would jeopardize the subtle leverage he has created. His revenge is slow and accumulative, not impulsive or visible. You should imagine the clerk's daily frustrations. They shuffle papers, attempt to reconstruct the lost registers, and consult neighboring towns for references. Mistakes in these reconstructions become evident quickly. Families that were under-assessed begin to receive attention. Families that were overburdened are noticed. The fire has exposed inequality not with rhetoric but with absence. What is no longer there forces attention. Thomas does not act publicly, but he subtly shapes outcomes. He advises neighbors on how to present claims for relief. He points out inconsistencies in reconstructed records. Slowly, families regain property or exemptions. Officials begin to tread carefully, aware that errors can no longer be hidden without scrutiny. This is not dramatic. There is no trial or confrontation. It is administrative pressure, the quiet insistence that injustice cannot persist unnoticed. Thomas's awareness and initiative serve as an invisible check on authority. Meanwhile, rumors about the fire spread. Some townspeople claim divine intervention. Others suspect hidden enemies or rival towns. The ambiguity protects Thomas, even as it amplifies the symbolic weight of his act. People begin to see that the system, long taken for granted, can be disrupted by knowledge, attention, and courage. The effect of this disruption extends further. The town council starts keeping multiple copies of all important records. Clerks are supervised more closely. Procedures are tightened. The fire has created accountability that did not exist before, not through punishment but through exposure. You should notice how revenge in this case is cumulative. Each small correction, each restored obligation, each adjusted assessment is a ripple from a single act. Thomas does not need recognition or reward. The system itself has been recalibrated. Justice, though slow, begins to manifest. At the same time, Thomas is aware of limits. He cannot undo every injustice. Some families remain disadvantaged. Officials remain cautious, but not fundamentally changed. The fire was a spark, not a revolution. Yet, in its subtlety lies its power. By attacking the mechanisms rather than the people directly, Thomas reshapes authority without provoking uncontrolled violence. As this section draws to a close, consider how acts of revenge can be invisible yet transformative. Consider how procedural disruption can correct injustice more effectively than confrontation or force. And consider how ordinary people, armed with observation, memory, and patience, can influence systems far larger than themselves. You now observe the town of northern England. Months after the fire, spring has returned in earnest, and with it, the familiar hum of daily life. Markets bustle, ovens are stoked, and farmers repair fences after winter frost. To a casual observer, nothing seems changed. Yet the invisible shift that Thomas initiated continues to ripple through the town's administration. The bailiff, though outwardly composed, is aware of the fragility revealed by the fire. Clerks are more cautious. Every new record is cross-checked. Families learn that petitions, if carefully presented, can be honored. Mistakes and favoritism that might have been ignored in previous years are now questioned. Authority, once unchallenged, has learned to respect scrutiny. Thomas himself continues his quiet work. He delivers bread, observes conversations, and advises neighbors on procedural matters. Always subtly, he does not claim credit. He avoids notice. His revenge is complete not because officials are punished, but because their power has been tempered by awareness. The system itself now carries the weight of transparency. You should imagine the psychological impact on both townspeople and officials. The fire, brief and localized, instilled a lesson. Even small acts of intervention can recalibrate authority. The careful observation of discrepancies, combined with patience and timing, proves more enduring than threats or violence. Thomas's method of revenge relies entirely on knowledge, foresight, and persistence. Over time, the town's administration gradually stabilizes. New registers are established. Clerks follow stricter procedures. Families learn to negotiate with the system, armed with insight gained from the disruption. Those who had previously exploited loopholes find fewer opportunities. The fire and its aftermath have created a subtle equilibrium. What makes Thomas's revenge remarkable is that it does not conclude with spectacle or suffering. No one is publicly shamed. No authority is dismantled violently. Instead, the injustice he observed, the overtaxation, the inequities embedded in routine, is addressed through disruption, awareness, and procedural correction. This quiet influence proves far more lasting than any immediate act of vengeance could have been. As you reflect on this story, consider how the destruction of records, the patient observation of a system, and the subtle guidance of others can constitute a form of justice that endures longer than direct confrontation. Thomas, a baker's son, leaves no monument, no official acknowledgement. Yet his careful intervention reshapes the mechanisms of authority for years to come. In the long view of medieval history, this story reminds you that revenge need not be violent to be effective. It can be deliberate, patient, and procedural, operating through the quiet recalibration of power rather than through spectacle or destruction. Sometimes the most enduring acts of retribution are those that correct, expose, and guide, leaving systems stronger, fairer, and wiser for those who remain. You now travel northwest to the Duchy of Normandy. In the late 11th century, a region defined by rolling hills, dense forests, and the imposing stone keeps of its lords. Life here is orderly, regulated by oaths, customs, and the careful management of estates. Yet beneath this veneer of feudal stability, tensions simmer between lords, stewards, and the peasants who sustain the economy. Revenge in this environment is rarely immediate or violent. It is methodical, administrative, and deeply strategic. At the center of this story is Richard, a steward serving a powerful Norman lord. His duties are extensive, collecting rents, overseeing harvests, managing accounts, and arbitrating minor disputes. The position carries significant authority, but also vulnerability. A steward who mismanages finances, or who fails to navigate the Lord's favor, can lose everything. Likewise, those who are overstepped or slighted may find subtle avenues for retaliation. Richard's story begins, not with an act of public scandal, but with a series of small betrayals. One of his colleagues begins manipulating accounts to favor his own relatives. Peasants, who depend on him for fair assessments, are forced to pay more than their due. The Lord is unaware, trusting Richard's reports without question. Errors accumulate, and Richard's position is threatened by his own oversight and the machinations of others. You should imagine the day-to-day reality of Richard's work. The hours spent poring over ledgers, noting each entry, reconciling debts with painstaking accuracy. Every coin must be accounted for, every field surveyed, every tenant recorded. Small mistakes can have large consequences, and minor favoritism, once discovered, can upend his reputation. His mind becomes trained to detect anomalies, irregularities, and the quiet signs of deceit. The turning point comes when Richard uncovers deliberate manipulation. Records have been altered, payments misallocated, minor offences recorded against loyal tenants while guilty parties remain unrecorded. The betrayal is calculated, subtle, and effective, designed to undermine his credibility. What is remarkable is that it is invisible to the Lord, who trusts Richard implicitly. In this system, trust is currency, and deception is the quietest form of treachery. Richard does not react immediately. Open confrontation would be risky, exposing him to retaliation or removal. Instead, he begins careful observation, documenting each irregularity with precision. He memorizes sequences, notes patterns, and begins to anticipate future attempts at subversion. In this environment, revenge must be delayed, patient, and cumulative. You should consider how unusual this form of vengeance is. It is not dramatic. It involves no sword, no open conflict. Instead, it relies on knowledge, meticulous attention, and timing. Richard transforms betrayal into a puzzle, observing not only the actions of others, but their dependencies and weaknesses within the administrative system. Months pass. Each time irregularities occur, Richard notes them carefully. He begins to manipulate records subtly in his own favor, correcting injustices without exposing his knowledge directly. Tenants see their complaints addressed. Peasants who were previously exploited gain recognition. Richard's reputation quietly strengthens, while the deceiver's attempts at undermining him fail systematically. You should imagine the precision required. One misstep, one premature exposure, could destroy him. Instead, he moves like a shadow, correcting errors, documenting abuses, and allowing the system to reveal the dishonesty of others naturally. Authority in this world is fragile, dependent on accurate records and perception of competence. Richard leverages both. As this section closes, consider how revenge in medieval administrative structures often took the form of patience, documentation, and quiet correction. Consider how those with knowledge of the system could expose corruption without confrontation. And consider whether the most effective acts of vengeance are sometimes invisible, shaping outcomes over time rather than erupting in immediate spectacle. You remain in Normandy, observing Richard as the months turn into years. The rolling hills and stone keeps of his lord's estates are familiar now, yet nothing in the landscape mirrors the subtle shifts taking place in the hearts and minds of those around him. Life continues according to rhythm. Harvests are measured, rents collected, peasants work the fields, and minor disputes are adjudicated in the hall of the manor. Yet beneath the surface, the patterns Richard has begun to notice are changing the power dynamics quietly but profoundly. Richard's attention to detail becomes his greatest asset. Every account he reviews, every ledger he examines, reinforces a growing map of influence. He notices which tenants are reliable, which clerks are sloppy, and which of his colleagues are willing to manipulate the records for personal gain. This is not idle observation. It is strategic intelligence, built meticulously over countless hours of labor and calculation. His revenge is no longer merely reactive, it is anticipatory. You should imagine him at the manor. During a late autumn afternoon, candles flicker as he pores over entries from years past, comparing ledgers with memory and prior notes. He notices discrepancies so small that they might escape a casual observer. A payment recorded twice, a rent entry slightly altered, a tenant's complaint misfiled. Each anomaly is catalogued, cross-referenced, and stored mentally for future leverage. In these small details, Richard finds both proof of deceit and the tools to correct it. The next stage of his plan unfolds subtly. He begins to restore justice in small ways that appear coincidental. A tenant whose payment was recorded incorrectly suddenly receives relief. A neighboring landholder finds that disputes over boundaries are resolved in their favor, but only because Richard has presented records accurately and at the right time. The deception of his colleague is exposed not through accusation, but through careful, objective record keeping. The manipulator is humiliated quietly. Colleagues notice errors in his oversight, reputation falters, yet he cannot identify the hand that corrected him. You should consider the ingenuity of this method. Richard does not act in anger. He does not attack openly. Instead, he wields the administrative system itself as an instrument of justice. The power of the office, combined with careful observation and patience, becomes his tool of revenge. Authority is corrected not with spectacle, but with evidence. Meanwhile, the stakes rise. A minor rebellion among the peasants threatens to escalate when disputes over rents and obligations are mishandled. Richard uses his knowledge of records to intervene. He adjusts allocations, clarifies obligations, and ensures that loyal tenants are protected, while subtly exposing those responsible for inequities. The rebellion loses momentum, not because of force, but because the system, now recalibrated, leaves little room for exploitation. Richard's own position strengthens. The Lord, impressed by the smooth resolution of disputes and the clarity of accounts, trusts him more deeply. Colleagues who attempted deception are marginalized, either transferred or monitored closely. Authority in the manor begins to align not with favoritism, but with the integrity of information. Richard's revenge has become institutional, shaping the operation of the estate itself. You should notice the discipline required for such slow, strategic vengeance. Patience is not passive. Every decision, every correction, every intervention must be timed precisely. Miscalculation could lead to exposure or loss of authority. Richard's mastery lies in the combination of vigilance, subtlety, and unwavering attention to detail. As this section closes, consider how medieval power structures, so dependent on record-keeping and reputation, can be influenced by those who understand their inner workings. Consider how revenge can be administered through patience, knowledge, and precision rather than violence. And consider how an individual, operating quietly within a system, can reshape authority to reflect fairness and competence over favoritism and deceit. You now witness the culmination of Richard's careful strategy. Years after the first signs of betrayal appeared, the rolling hills and stone keeps of Normandy remain constant. Yet within the manor, the rhythm of authority has subtly shifted. What once relied on unquestioned deference and casual oversight now functions with precision, transparency, and caution. The invisible hand of Richard's patient intervention guides outcomes, though no one outside the manor knows his role. The colleague who manipulated records finds himself isolated. Subtle corrections in ledgers, cross-checked accounts, and careful documentation repeatedly expose his errors. Each exposure is quiet, procedural, and undeniable. Colleagues notice inconsistencies but cannot prove malice. Reputation, so crucial in this hierarchical society, falters. Authority is eroded without confrontation, without spectacle, and without the appearance of personal vindictiveness. Richard's revenge, measured and strategic, has done its work. You should imagine the manor's hall, where tenants bring disputes and reports are read aloud. Richard is present, calm and attentive, noting patterns, discrepancies and claims. When issues arise, he applies the knowledge accumulated over years. Records that once allowed manipulation now serve to restore justice. Decisions are enforced according to accurate information, rather than favoritism. Those who once sought to exploit the system find themselves constrained by their own errors. Even the Lord, unaware of the intricate adjustments, benefits from the transformation. Estates function more efficiently, disputes are minimized, and confidence in administration grows. Authority now operates with fairness embedded into its procedures. Richard's careful work has created a system in which justice and oversight coexist, and manipulation is far more difficult. His revenge is complete not through punishment, but through systemic correction. You should notice how subtly psychological this form of vengeance is. The manipulative colleague suffers quietly, knowing that errors are exposed yet unable to identify the agent responsible. Others in the manor adopt more careful behavior, mindful of scrutiny. Authority and compliance are reshaped through observation, transparency, and the disciplined application of knowledge. Richard himself remains understated. He continues his duties without seeking recognition, preferring the quiet satisfaction of long-term success over immediate glory. His influence is structural. The processes he has refined persist, ensuring that the manor operates fairly and efficiently long after his interventions. As this story concludes, consider the unusual nature of revenge in administrative contexts. It need not involve confrontation, punishment, or spectacle. Knowledge, patience, and attention to detail can serve as instruments of justice that endure far longer than impulsive action. Richard demonstrates that quiet observation, coupled with methodical correction, can recalibrate power, exposing corruption, and restoring order without dramatic conflict. In the larger sweep of medieval Normandy, his story reminds you that effective revenge can be invisible. It may leave no monument, cause no bloodshed, yet its influence can persist across generations, quietly shaping the systems and behaviors of those who follow. The vengeful steward leaves a legacy of integrity, discipline, and the enduring power of careful, patient action. You now move south to the rugged hills and fertile plains of northern Castile in the early 13th century. Villages are clustered around stone churches, markets are held weekly, and life follows a rhythm defined by the seasons, liturgical hours, and the subtle hierarchy of lord, tenant, and peasant. Justice is often local, personal, and slow, and the lives of women, especially widows, are tightly constrained by custom, property law, and social expectation. Yet, even in such limitations, opportunity for quiet influence and subtle revenge exists. At the center of this story is Beatrice, a widow whose husband, a minor noble, has recently died. Her dower, the property allocated to her for survival, is meager but sufficient to sustain her household. Immediately following her husband's death, she is confronted with the reality of medieval law. While men could actively pursue power and protection, widows were dependent on local courts and the goodwill of relatives or neighbors. Disputes over inheritance, property boundaries, and obligations often leave women vulnerable to exploitation. Beatrice's particular grievance begins with her late husband's cousin Rodrigo, who manages much of the estate in the interim. Rodrigo is outwardly dutiful, yet subtle acts of favoritism and mismanagement gradually emerge. Portions of land that should revert to her control are diverted to other relatives. Peasants who owed labor to her late husband's household are reassigned elsewhere. Decisions are presented as routine, unremarkable, yet they cumulatively deprive her of the authority and resources she legally deserves. You should imagine Beatrice's daily life during this time. She rises early to tend her household, supervises servants, manages supplies, and maintains correspondence with the local court. All her movements are constrained by societal expectations. She is expected to be silent, patient, and modest. Any overt challenge would risk social censure or loss of protection. Yet Beatrice does not resign herself to inaction. She begins to observe the mechanisms of control, which documents grant authority, which witnesses hold credibility in court, and how the local magistrates interpret customary law. Knowledge becomes her instrument, patience her weapon. Every contract, every account, every statement of a witness is catalogued mentally, and when possible, in writing. She becomes acutely aware of the ways in which procedure can be leveraged to her advantage. Her opportunity arises through the legal system itself. Widows could petition the courts to assert their dower, recover property, or challenge mismanagement. The process is slow, often requiring repeated appearances, corroboration of witnesses, and careful navigation of local politics. Beatrice approaches this systematically, framing her claims with precision, citing precedents, and appealing to the authority of the court. Her strategy is not confrontational, it is meticulous. You should imagine her attending sessions at the local court. The room is austere, a wooden bench for the magistrate, a small table for documents, and townspeople observing silently. Each petition she presents is measured, her tone calm, her evidence orderly. At first, magistrates dismiss minor claims or delay proceedings, reflecting both skepticism of a woman's authority and the practical difficulties of enforcing dower rights. Yet Beatrice persists. Over weeks and months, she notices patterns in rulings, the preferences of clerks, and the informal hierarchies among the court staff. Each observation allows her to adjust her petitions, anticipate objections, and present documentation more persuasively. What initially seems bureaucratic tedium gradually becomes a strategic advantage. Her revenge, though subtle, begins to take shape. She is not seeking punishment through violence or public humiliation. Instead, she aims to reclaim authority and recognition, correcting the imbalances imposed by Rodrigo and others who have exploited her widowhood. Every successful petition, every clarification of a misrecorded property boundary, represents a quiet assertion of power, a restoration of fairness, and a small correction of social imbalance. By the end of this first section, Beatrice has laid the groundwork for a long campaign of procedural justice. Her enemies remain unaware of the full extent of her strategy, and the system that limits her also contains the tools she will use to restore her position. Her revenge is slow, patient, and invisible to most, but it is carefully calculated. As you reflect on this story, consider how knowledge, observation, and endurance can serve as instruments of influence in societies where open action is limited. Consider how revenge need not involve spectacle or confrontation to be effective, and how the quiet persistence of one individual can reshape authority within entrenched systems. You remain in the northern hills of Castile, following Beatrice as her quiet campaign unfolds. Winter has passed, leaving the earth damp and fertile, and life in the village continues in its measured rhythms. Yet beneath this surface, the dynamics of power within her late husband's estate are subtly shifting. What was once assumed, Rodrigo's unchallenged management of the property, is now under careful scrutiny. Beatriz continues her meticulous study of the local legal system. She notes which officials are sympathetic, which are inclined toward expediency, and which are more inclined to favor written evidence over verbal assertion. She memorizes patterns in rulings, observes which witnesses are most credible, and records dates of prior agreements. Her approach is patient, deliberate, and strategic. This is the work of slow revenge, accumulating leverage without exposing herself to direct risk. You should imagine her daily routine. Mornings are spent supervising her household and attending to practical matters such as provisioning and overseeing servants. Afternoons are devoted to reviewing documents, drafting petitions, and meeting discreetly with allies among local clerks and loyal tenants. Evenings are spent reflecting on the events of the day, noting subtle cues that indicate shifts in influence or intention. In every action, patience and observation guide her decisions. Rodrigo, unaware of her growing expertise, continues to administer the estate as he pleases. He diverts resources, assigns tenants elsewhere, and presumes that Beatriz's widowhood renders her powerless. Yet, each misstep is catalogued. Each act of favoritism, each procedural oversight, becomes evidence for her claims. Over time, patterns emerge. She notices that certain property disputes recur frequently because records are incomplete, and that some of Rodrigo's decisions contradict earlier agreements. These observations form the foundation of her strategy. The first tangible successes appear when Beatriz begins submitting petitions to the local court with precise evidence. She corrects misrecorded boundaries, ensures that tenants' obligations are accurately documented, and demands recognition for her dower rights. Each petition is carefully timed to coincide with moments when officials are attentive, but procedural pressures make delay difficult. These are not dramatic victories, but incremental corrections that gradually reclaim her authority. You should consider the subtle psychology at play. Rodrigo is unaware that his actions are being monitored with precision. Each misstep he makes, each favoritism he displays, strengthens Beatriz's position. Her quiet attention becomes a form of leverage. The knowledge that every action can be traced and every record scrutinized forces the manipulative steward into caution, whether he realizes it or not. Beatriz's influence begins to ripple beyond her immediate estate. Tenants who had previously been ignored or exploited see their concerns addressed. Their loyalty shifts subtly toward her. Local clerks, noticing the meticulous accuracy of her petitions, begin to rely on her guidance for clarification. Even magistrates come to recognize her as a credible, reliable party in disputes. Her reputation grows quietly but steadily. By now, her revenge has fully taken shape. It is not fueled by anger or desire for punishment, but by methodical correction of inequity. Each success restores not only property and rights, but also the social balance that Rodrigo and others had disturbed. Authority is recalibrated, procedural integrity is reinforced, and those who sought to exploit her position find themselves constrained by evidence and precedent. As this section closes, consider how long-term observation, strategic use of legal procedures, and careful accumulation of evidence can serve as instruments of revenge and justice. Consider how patience and discretion allow one individual to influence outcomes in a system that appears overwhelmingly biased against them, and consider how subtle, procedural actions can have lasting effects, quietly reshaping authority and social dynamics. You now witness the final phase of Beatriz's carefully orchestrated campaign, years after her husband's death. The hills and villages of northern Castile remain as they always have, but the dynamics of her estate have shifted quietly yet irrevocably. Rodrigo, once confident in his unchallenged administration, now finds every action scrutinized. Authority no longer operates unchecked. It is bound by the weight of meticulous records, keen observation, and the quiet insistence of a widow determined to reclaim her rights. Beatriz has perfected her method. Every petition she submits to the court is supported by corroborated testimony, cross-referenced charters, and precise documentation. The clerks and magistrates, initially indifferent or skeptical, have come to recognize her reliability and diligence. Each small victory, the correction of a misassigned tenancy, the restoration of dower rights, the acknowledgement of previously ignored obligations, strengthens her position and subtly undermines Rodrigo's authority. You should imagine the psychological effect on Rodrigo. He is aware that his decisions are no longer invisible. His attempts at favoritism or mismanagement are quietly but systematically countered by evidence he cannot dispute. He is humiliated not by confrontation, but by the inexorable logic of facts. Others in the manor, observing his faltering credibility, adjust their behavior accordingly. Authority and power are reshaped without a single public quarrel. Beatrice's victories extend beyond material restoration. Her tenants gain a measure of security and confidence in the fairness of the system. The procedural integrity of the estate is reinforced. Even neighboring estates take note of her competence and diligence, ensuring that future disputes are approached with caution and respect for documented rights. Her revenge is subtle but systemic. It changes the way power functions and how authority is exercised within her sphere. Her personal life remains austere. She has sacrificed comfort and social ease to pursue this slow justice. Yet, the outcome is enduring. Rodrigo's unchecked manipulation is no longer possible, and the balance of authority has shifted in favor of fairness, diligence, and accountability. Beatrice has transformed vulnerability into influence, oppression into strategic leverage. You should reflect on the uniqueness of her revenge. It is not violent, it is not public, it does not rely on spectacle or intimidation. Instead, it is delivered through patience, meticulous attention to detail, and a deep understanding of the mechanisms of power. By working quietly within the system, Beatrice achieves outcomes that sudden action or force could never have accomplished. As this story closes, consider how revenge in medieval society could be exercised through procedure, observation, and knowledge rather than conflict. Reflect on how individuals constrained by law and custom could manipulate those constraints to restore justice and authority. Beatrice's story reminds you that sometimes the most effective acts of vengeance are invisible, methodical, and lasting, leaving no monument but permanently changing the social and administrative fabric around them. You now move eastward to the bustling streets of Bologna in the early 14th century, a city alive with the murmur of scholars, the clatter of carts, and the constant flow of students and lecturers at one of Europe's oldest universities. Knowledge here is both power and currency. The university is a labyrinth of colleges, lecture halls, and private chambers, where disputes over prestige, positions, and ideas are settled not with force, but with cunning, documentation, and alliances. Revenge, in this environment, is intellectual and procedural rather than physical. At the center of this story is Pietro, a young scholar in the Faculty of Law. He is meticulous, attentive to detail, and driven by a quiet intensity. Pietro's early years in Bologna are marked by rigorous study, long hours transcribing texts, and careful observation of both colleagues and professors. He learns that in this environment, reputation is fragile, and small missteps can have lasting consequences. Authority is measured in citations, lectures given, and recognition by peers rather than titles or armies. Pietro's grievance begins subtly. A senior scholar, Lorenzo, claims credit for research and interpretations that Pietro himself had painstakingly developed. Lorenzo is politically well-connected, his arguments delivered confidently in lecture halls and debated openly in university chambers. Pietro, being younger and less socially established, cannot challenge him directly without risking ridicule, censure, or expulsion. Open confrontation would be perilous. His revenge must be calculated, patient, and precise. You should imagine the daily rhythm of Pietro's life. He rises before dawn to study manuscripts in the candlelit scriptorium, cross-references legal texts, and annotates margins with careful notes. Lectures and disputations occupy the late mornings and afternoons, while evenings are spent drafting his own analyses and quietly observing the patterns of recognition and favoritism among faculty. Every interaction, every citation, every reference is recorded mentally or in his meticulous notebooks. The first step of Pietro's strategy is observation. He tracks Lorenzo's lectures, noting where claims are overstated, where citations are misrepresented, and where errors in interpretation occur. He documents these discrepancies with precision. He also observes the mechanisms by which faculty reputation is built, which endorsements carry weight, which lectures influence students most, and how written submissions are reviewed and published. Every small detail becomes a potential lever for influence. Next, Pietro cultivates alliances quietly. He offers assistance to junior scholars, shares resources strategically, and builds a network of peers who recognize his reliability and insight. This network becomes crucial. While he cannot attack Lorenzo directly, he can influence perceptions through collective awareness. Reputation, after all, is social as well as procedural. You should imagine the slow accumulation of subtle advantages. Pietro begins submitting papers to university circles, carefully documenting his sources and presenting analyses that are both accurate and compelling. Lorenzo, overconfident, continues his practice of overstatement. Each time he is contradicted, however politely, by precise references or peer-corroborated notes, his credibility erodes incrementally. Pietro does not need to attack him openly. The system, when navigated intelligently, exposes the gaps and embellishments. By the end of this section, Pietro has laid the groundwork for a slow and enduring retribution. His observations, alliances, and meticulous documentation have created a position from which he can influence the academic hierarchy without confrontation. Lorenzo remains unaware of the full extent of Pietro's strategy. While Pietro steadily builds both reputation and authority, his revenge is methodical, intellectual, and procedural. It is the quiet assertion of correctness and integrity over deceit and pretense. As this section closes, consider how intellectual environments, with their reliance on reputation, documentation, and social networks, can be arenas for slow, strategic revenge. Reflect on how patience, observation, and meticulous attention to detail allow one individual to recalibrate authority and influence outcomes, even in a society that prizes hierarchy and connections over merit. You remain in Bologna, following Pietro as his quiet campaign of intellectual justice unfolds. The city hums with the rhythm of lectures, debates, and the shuffle of manuscripts, yet beneath this surface subtle shifts in academic authority are taking place. Pietro's revenge is not visible to the untrained eye. It is embedded in citations, lecture corrections, and the precise accumulation of evidence that exposes misrepresentation without confrontation. Months pass, and Pietro's careful observations yield actionable insight. He notices patterns in Lorenzo's work: repeated overstatements, selective citation, and occasional misinterpretation of legal texts. These are minor errors, easily overlooked by casual readers, yet, in the meticulous environment of the university, they carry weight. Pietro records each discrepancy, cross-referencing manuscripts and notes to ensure that his documentation is indisputable. The power of his strategy lies in precision and patient accumulation of evidence. You should imagine Pietro in the scriptorium, candlelight flickering over the dense Latin of legal treatises. Every line is compared with older manuscripts. Every footnote is checked, every argument cross-examined. Errors are catalogued, organized, and prepared for subtle exposure. Pietro is neither impulsive nor overtly confrontational. He understands that in a system governed by peer recognition, credibility is fragile and can be undermined quietly, but irrevocably. Next, he begins to influence perception among his peers and students. He subtly highlights correct interpretations in lectures, shares precise references with other junior scholars, and ensures that his work is cited accurately. Lorenzo, unaware of Pietro's growing influence, continues to present his overstatements in classrooms and disputations. Each time he does, the accuracy and thoroughness of Pietro's responses, often delivered with calm authority and supported by documentation, undermines Lorenzo's credibility incrementally. You should notice the psychology at play. Lorenzo is unaware of the systematic patient exposure occurring around him. He perceives occasional corrections as minor challenges, rather than the coordinated demonstration of his unreliability. Meanwhile, Pietro gains trust among both peers and students, his quiet competence and meticulous methodology gradually earning recognition. By influencing perception and reputation, rather than confronting directly, Pietro reshapes the academic hierarchy without provoking open conflict. The results begin to show. In disputations, Lorenzo's assertions are questioned politely, but firmly, by those now informed by Pietro's careful guidance. Subtle corrections and cross-reference citations highlight errors without public accusation. Pietro's influence grows steadily, manuscripts circulate under his authority, students seek his mentorship, and junior scholars rely on his guidance to navigate university politics. The slow recalibration of power is complete in its subtlety. By now, Pietro's revenge is systemic. It relies not on anger or dramatic confrontation, but on knowledge, precision, and the careful orchestration of credibility. The academic environment, which prizes reputation and accurate scholarship, becomes the vehicle for justice. Each minor exposure, each quietly corrected misstatement, chips away at Lorenzo's influence while consolidating Pietro's. As this section closes, consider how in environments governed by knowledge, influence and reputation, patience and meticulous observation can serve as powerful tools of revenge. Reflect on how one individual, operating quietly and strategically, can correct injustice and recalibrate authority over time, and consider how intellectual integrity, when combined with careful planning, can be more enduring and impactful than overt confrontation. You now witness the culmination of Pietro's patient strategy in the bustling city of Bologna. Years have passed, and the rhythm of academic life, lectures, disputations, manuscript copying, and debates, continues as always. Yet beneath the familiar routine, the hierarchy of influence has shifted. Pietro, once a junior scholar overlooked by his peers, now holds subtle authority over the distribution of knowledge, mentorship, and reputation within the university. Lorenzo, by contrast, finds his credibility quietly eroded, exposed not by scandal or accusation, but by the slow, precise demonstration of errors over time. Pietro's work reaches its full effect in several interconnected ways. He continues to publish analyses and interpretations, carefully documented and cross-referenced. Students, initially unaware of the prior manipulations, cite his work and follow his interpretations. Faculty, observing the accuracy and consistency of his scholarship, begin to recognize his expertise. Lorenzo's overstatements, once tolerated, are now highlighted through contrast, exposing gaps in reasoning and lapses in scholarship. Authority is shifted through knowledge and meticulous documentation rather than confrontation. You should imagine the subtle triumph in Pietro's approach. He does not humiliate Lorenzo in public. He does not seek punishment. Each correction, each accurate citation, and each discreet intervention in classroom discussions accumulates as quiet evidence of reliability and rigor. Lorenzo's reputation suffers not through spectacle, but through the systemic reinforcement of accuracy and intellectual integrity. Pietro's revenge is both enduring and elegant. It reshapes the academic landscape without drawing attention to the act itself. At the same time, Pietro consolidates alliances. Junior scholars, once hesitant to challenge the established hierarchy, now rely on his mentorship. Students respect his guidance, clerks and scribes defer to his organizational precision, and faculty seek his opinion on procedural and interpretative matters. In this way, the slow, patient work of correction and observation not only serves as revenge against Lorenzo, but strengthens the broader integrity of the academic system. You should notice the discipline required for such a strategy. Pietro's revenge is long-term, reliant on meticulous attention to detail, constant observation, and precise timing. It is not impulsive, emotional, or violent. Instead, it leverages the structures and expectations of the university itself, credibility, documentation, and peer recognition. By operating within the system, Pietro ensures that the consequences of Lorenzo's initial misdeeds are revealed, corrected, and remembered. As this story closes, consider how intellectual and procedural power can serve as tools of revenge. Reflect on how meticulous observation, patience, and strategic use of evidence can shift authority quietly but irrevocably. Pietro's story reminds you that vengeance need not be dramatic or destructive to be effective. It can unfold over years, subtly reshaping systems, reputations, and the balance of power. The scholar's calculated retribution demonstrates that knowledge, precision, and perseverance are among the most enduring instruments of justice. You now travel north to a modest Flemish town in the late 14th century, a settlement defined by narrow cobbled streets, half-timbered houses, and the constant clanging of hammers from workshops along the river. Life is governed by trade guilds, local magistrates, and the rhythms of craft and commerce. Here, reputation and trust are as valuable as gold, and minor disputes, over work, payment, or property, can linger for years, quietly influencing the social order. Revenge in such a context is rarely dramatic. It is patient, calculated, and embedded in the very structure of everyday life. At the center of this story is Joris, a blacksmith of modest means but remarkable attention to detail. He is not wealthy, but his skill is respected, and his workshop is essential to the town's daily operations. Hammers echo through his shop from dawn until late evening, shaping iron into nails, tools, and horseshoes. Joris understands the precision required for both his craft and his reputation. One misaligned horseshoe or faulty blade could ruin his credibility, his livelihood, and the trust of his customers. The story begins with a grievance that might seem mundane, but which carries profound implications for Joris's life. A wealthy merchant, Cornelis, repeatedly cheats local craftsmen, including Joris, by underpaying for completed work and exploiting loopholes in guild regulations. Cornelis is influential, able to sway guild officials and manipulate contracts to his advantage. Open confrontation would be dangerous. Legal remedies are slow, and in a small town where favor and influence govern trade, Joris risks losing not only this client but also his standing among other craftsmen. You should imagine Joris observing carefully over months. He notes every transaction, every contract, and every instance of Cornelis's exploitation. Receipts are preserved meticulously. Witnesses, who might otherwise remain silent, are consulted quietly and discreetly. Every detail, prices agreed upon, dates of delivery, condition of goods is recorded in ledgers that Joris keeps hidden from prying eyes. He does not react immediately, understanding that patience is his most powerful weapon. The first step of his subtle revenge is exposure without confrontation. Joris begins to ensure that each piece of work delivered is accompanied by undeniable evidence of the agreed-upon terms. Cornelis, accustomed to manipulating agreements and taking advantage of informal arrangements, finds his tactics increasingly constrained. Small disputes arise as Joris presents clear documentation that contradicts Cornelis's claims. Arguments that were previously invisible to others now gain weight because of careful record-keeping. You should notice the ingenuity of this approach. Joris's strategy does not involve force, nor public humiliation. It relies on precision, foresight, and the patient accumulation of evidence. The balance of power, once heavily skewed toward Cornelis due to influence and wealth, begins to shift. Authority, in this case the recognition of fair business practices enforced by the guild, is leveraged as a tool for retribution. By the end of this first section, Joris has created a foundation for slow but enduring revenge. His ledger, his careful documentation, and his growing network of witnesses have begun to restrain Cornelis's influence. The merchant remains unaware of the full extent of Joris's strategy, interpreting the emerging challenges as coincidental or minor disputes. In truth, the groundwork for systemic recalibration of power has been laid. As this section closes, consider how everyday skills, attention to detail, meticulous record-keeping, and strategic observation can be transformed into instruments of justice and revenge. Reflect on how patience and discretion allow an ordinary craftsman to challenge authority and influence outcomes in a society governed by reputation and influence. The subtle power of knowledge and documentation is quietly as formidable as any sword or spectacle. You remain in the Flemish town, following Joris as his careful and deliberate strategy begins to take effect. Life continues its familiar rhythm. The river carries trade goods, carts rattle along cobbled streets, and the clang of hammers resonates from workshops along the main road. On the surface, nothing seems changed. Yet beneath this ordinary flow of life, the balance of power between the blacksmith and the merchant Cornelis is quietly shifting. Joris's revenge is not immediate. It unfolds in small, deliberate steps, each dependent on accuracy, observation, and timing. He continues to maintain meticulous records of every transaction, noting agreed prices, dates of delivery, and the quality of each item produced. These records are cross-checked with witnesses, apprentices, and occasional correspondences with other craftsmen. Over time, he has built a network of colleagues who respect both his skill and his integrity, and who can corroborate his documentation if disputes arise. You should imagine the subtle psychological effect this creates. Cornelis, accustomed to exploiting loopholes and relying on informal agreements, now encounters unexpected resistance. Each attempt at underpayment or manipulation is met not with immediate confrontation, but with calm, documented evidence that undermines his claim. He grows frustrated and increasingly cautious, though he cannot openly accuse Joris of obstruction. The merchant is learning that even wealth and influence have limits when faced with precision and foresight. The blacksmith's strategy extends further than mere documentation. Joris begins to manage deliveries and inspections strategically. He ensures that key witnesses are present when Cornelis reviews the work, making deviations or attempts at manipulation visible to others. He times communications so that discrepancies are highlighted in public forums, such as guild meetings or inspections, without appearing confrontational. In this way, Cornelis is constrained not by direct accusation, but by the structure and visibility of his own actions. You should notice the patience required for this form of revenge. Months pass before tangible results emerge. Joris does not act impulsively or out of anger. Each step is measured, designed to maximize exposure of Cornelis's manipulations while minimizing risk to himself. Authority, in this context, the merchant's ability to exploit others, is eroded systematically through careful observation, evidence, and timing. By the middle of this period, Joris's quiet interventions begin to bear fruit. Disputes over payments and contracts are resolved in his favor more consistently. Guild officials, noting the consistency and precision of his records, start favoring his claims in arbitration. Peers who once deferred to Cornelis now observe his vulnerabilities. The merchant's influence within the town's trade network diminishes incrementally, replaced by recognition of Joris's reliability and skill. The effect is cumulative and invisible to most. No one witness sees a dramatic confrontation. No public humiliation occurs, yet authority has shifted. Where Cornelis once dictated terms without challenge, he now operates under subtle scrutiny, aware that errors and manipulations will be detected and exposed quietly but irrevocably. Joris's revenge is procedural, strategic, and enduring. As this section closes, consider how influence and power can be recalibrated through observation, documentation, and patient strategy rather than direct confrontation. Reflect on how ordinary skills, attention to detail, meticulous record-keeping, and careful timing can become tools of justice and retribution. The blacksmith story reminds you that in societies governed by reputation, procedure, and trust, the most effective revenge is often invisible, methodical, and enduring. You now witness the final phase of Joris's quiet, calculated campaign in the Flemish town. Months have turned into years, and the rhythm of life, markets, workshops, river trade, remains outwardly unchanged. Yet beneath the surface, the hierarchy of trust, authority, and influence has shifted subtly but decisively. Cornelis, once confident in his ability to manipulate agreements and exploit craftsmen, now finds his power constrained by the very precision and foresight he once ignored. Joris's efforts have fully matured. His meticulous records, corroborated by witnesses and apprentices, now serve as an unassailable basis for disputes. Any attempt by Cornelis to underpay or manipulate contracts is systematically countered with documented evidence, leaving the merchant frustrated but unable to retaliate without admitting his own misdeeds. Joris's patient attention to detail and strategic timing have transformed authority itself. The balance of power now favors skill, integrity, and diligence over wealth and influence. You should imagine the subtle psychology at work. Cornelis, aware that his actions are monitored and that every misstep will be documented, becomes cautious, hesitant, and constrained. Peers and fellow merchants begin to notice his diminishing influence, while Joris gains respect for both competence and fairness. Authority has shifted without any confrontation, spectacle, or direct attack. The town's social and economic fabric is quietly recalibrated by methodical observation and strategic action. Joris's victories extend beyond mere financial recompense. His reputation as a skilled, reliable, and fair craftsman attracts new apprentices, more clients, and the trust of fellow guild members. The guild itself, recognizing the importance of accurate documentation and oversight, adopts procedures inspired by his meticulous approach. His revenge has not only restored his personal standing, but has also strengthened the fairness and transparency of the town's trade practices. You should notice the elegance of this method. Joris did not seek dramatic revenge or public humiliation. He did not wield force or incite anger. Instead, he used patience, observation, and systematic correction to reshape authority. By operating within the structures of the guild and the community, he ensured that the consequences of Cornelis's behavior were exposed and corrected in a lasting way. As this story closes, consider how slow, strategic, and procedural forms of revenge can produce enduring change. Reflect on how ordinary skills, when applied with intelligence and persistence, can recalibrate systems, influence authority, and restore justice. Joris's story reminds you that effective vengeance need not be dramatic or violent. It can unfold invisibly, reshaping relationships, reputations, and the mechanisms of power themselves.